Welcome to the Asking Why podcast. I'm your host, Clint Davis, and we have a return guest, my friend Donesa Walker. She is the owner and executive director of LearningRx here in Shreveport, but she's also a author and writer and speaker, and she does a bunch of amazing stuff. So I wanted to have her on today to talk about some of her books and talk about some of her journals and reflections that God has put on her heart to kind of put out to the world. We were talking before you guys started listening about publishing and all the ins and outs of that, so we might get into that some today. But she's got a few books. So the one we're looking at today is Rainbow of the Soul, Oceans of God's Love, Reflections of God Moments. These are two devotionals that she did. And then we got a couple of other books that she's put out. Heart Twinkle, which is about, it's kind of the baby that maybe you've lost in a miscarriage speaking back to you, which I think I told her before she goes, I was like, I'm not going to read that now or cry. And then Neurodiversity, which is about being somebody who's on the neurodiverse journey and how it's important for them to understand that they're special and they're unique and they're awesome. And so it's a poetic, introspective look into the inner workings of the neurodiverse, which I think is super needed in our culture. And that's a new thing. So we'll talk. I'd love to talk about just neurodiversity, at some point.
Absolutely.
But Donesa, welcome. And yeah, how's you doing?
I'm doing great.
Good.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So, we have another episode with her on LearningRx, so you don't have to worry about that. You can go back and listen to that if you want to learn about that. But tell us a little bit about kind of what got you into writing and books, and we'll move into what the books are about.
So I have a passion about sharing my soul and sharing my heart, and I believe that's a God calling. I believe that's a thing, that God just calls you to do different things in your life. And, as a counselor, it's really important for you to have that catharsis, have that moment where you can work out those things for you. And I think that's where I've always journaled. I've always, when I was a little girl, it was the diary, right? You write in your diary, and then as I became a teacher, then it was like, you need to take notes about everything because you won't remember. Right. I mean, you kind of jumble those things together and you start doing that. And so those just became habits, good habits that I created. I had a prayer journal beside my bed, where I would wake up in the night where God's speaking to me, or I have a thought and I would just jot it down, and then my mind would just mull on it and that sort of thing. And so I've just been writing for life, I guess. That's just been, and actually I write every morning. I have a devotional, a prayer time every morning, and I write every morning on Facebook. I put a devotional out, and so someone contacted me and said, I really wished I had a book of what you had written. And so that's how it started into the books.
Oh, that's awesome.
In the publication was actually someone's request. And so then I didn't know what length or anything like that, and so I ended up with 8 weeks, in each book. And so I have lots of them now.
Yeah, I bet.
Lots of those because they're, they've all come together in that piece. So
how many do you have in total?
Right now, the devotionals, there's 11.
Yeah.
There's 2 that are actually out for, publication that you can go on Amazon or whatever and buy.
Yeah.
But the others are in the pipeline, I would say, that they're in the publication process.
I think that's beautiful. I think, well, a couple things. One, writing is such an interesting thing in life because, Scripture was written, letters to the church were written as for a Christian perspective. So obviously that's how they could communicate then.
Sure.
But I think, when I'm not writing, when I'm not journaling, it's usually because I don't want to be in the present. I'm too busy. Right. I got stuff going on. It's like, that's the time that you should be writing,
right.
When you're stressed or overwhelmed or you have a lot going on. But I think in order to write, literally write, not just type, but write, you have to use your right or left hand. You're turning on certain parts of your brain, and you're having to feel your emotions and put it on the page and express it, and it's therapeutic.
It's very therapeutic and very good for the brain. I mean, it causes all kinds of good synapses to form and connect, and sometimes brings about thought processes that you really had not fully immersed or examined those things. And a lot of people are uncomfortable examining that with other people, but they can put it down on paper. That's something that they can write and kind of just throw it out there. And that's important. It's important for you in every relationship of your life that you're able to do that and to throw it out there. And it's scary for people in the world that we live in now. They're scared to put anything down because it's going to be held against them or something like that. So a lot of people have pulled back from doing that because they're scared of anything to be out there, you know. So write it down and tear it up if it bothers you that bad. I mean, like, go burn it, you know, whatever, if that's what you're worried. But
that can be cathartic too.
Yeah, that could be a cathartic process also. But I think that was, you know, really important in exploring, like with Oceans. That was the first one that I actually published. And so as we go through, and I was thinking about the depths of God's love and how we, you know, go into it. One of my favorite things I think about, I compare my Christian walk or my walk as like a walk on the beach. And, you know, we have choices. We can choose to stay on the sand and just have an occasional splash of God in our life. And some people are like that. They have that, they have avoidance. And then there's other people that, you know, they're out deep in the ocean. They go ahead and swim and they let the waves take them and swell over them. And at different places in our life, we are in different places of the ocean. Sometimes we're just, you know, treading water, and sometimes we're swimming, and sometimes we're just, you know, on the shallow area. Sometimes we hit a shelf that we thought we were swimming, and all of a sudden we're under the water, you know, and we have to get the faith board, you know, like the surfboard. We have to get a faith board to keep us, you know, sailing, because we get overwhelmed. We get overwhelmed with our circumstances and overwhelmed with our life. And so that was my feeling. And I think about that all the time, about how in our lives that we have to have that place of assurance for us. And so that was where the devotionals for me became that gathering of Oceans, was talking about all of those different things, from surfing the faith board to the tidal waves of life, and how they impact us, and just the different scenarios that come about. I will say all of my devotionals are very personal. Yeah. So you're going to learn way too much about me because they're written from my point of view and equated to my experiences in my life. And like I said, so there's a lot of personal experience in there.
Well, it's testimony.
It is testimony.
Right. I mean, I think that's what we're also nervous about. Whether it's writing, I know for me personally, you know, people think that, oh, you just do a podcast and you speak and you post stuff on social media, but you know, that's taken a lot of time to kind of refine and not feel insecure about, because you're putting your stuff out there. And I think in the beginning, especially when we're insecure, it's usually because there's probably a lot more pride underneath all that than you think. You want to be loved, you want to be validated, you want to be seen. And you have good intention, but then you have this other side that's like, but I also want to know that I'm worthy and valuable. And then as you do it, and you have your core people and your real people around you, you know, that starts to be less and less of it. And more it's just like, this is true, and this is who God is, and this is about God, and about what He's doing and what He's done. And so, you know, it doesn't really matter, because you're going to get naysayers no matter what. True. Right? You're going to have people that hate no matter what. And so, you know, I think people need to be, what I hope for our listeners is that they hear that they have a story. You know, it's not me and you. It's not, you know, Dr. Caroline Leaf, whoever the people are that they follow, that they think, oh, I could never do that. Yes, you could. Absolutely. And your story is just as important. And what God is writing on your heart and in your life with your parenting or your marriage or your singleness or whatever it is, people need it desperately. Because, I mean, I don't know about you, but my social media and newsfeed and my circle of information is 95% negative. Sure. And complaining and gossiping and slandering and clickbait nonsense. So there needs to be a lot more Christians writing about what God's doing, putting things out, self-publishing, and like in your sphere of influence, right? It's like, who cares what somebody in LA thinks about it? Right. Your sphere of influence, that you're able to hand these off and to where somebody calls you and says, hey, can you... Right. You started on Facebook. You literally just started posting things, and somebody's like, hey, I need this. Right. I need this in my life every day, you know, so I can be encouraged. Yeah. It's amazing. You know? I think that the thing about it is that we each have our own unique perspectives in life, and every one of us has viewpoints. I mean, you and I can go and experience the exact same thing, and what we bring to it is very different, and what we take away from it is very different. And so everyone who looks at that and says, well, I don't think that, or I don't feel that,
that's valuable.
Yeah.
What you feel and what you think is valuable. And so writing about that allows other people to see that this diversity of life, how God has created us with this unique puzzle pieces of who we are to make a master world. We're all just broken pieces of stained glass.
That's right.
And if we'll allow it, he'll make us into that masterpiece. But we have to allow him to do that to us. And sometimes that scary place of being broken, of having, terrible things that happen in your life and devastate you, from child loss, to that, I can't tell you how that feels. I mean, as a parent, it's a very traumatic experience. When I first lost my baby, I was just devastated. I was completely devastated. And when I would tell somebody, oh, well, I went through that too, and I went through that too. And I'm like, why? Why did no one tell me until I lost my baby? Why did you wait to tell me that, this is a part of normal life, that it happens?
Yeah.
And we don't. We try to hide those things, and we try to cover them up, and it's hard. And as strange as it is after we lost our baby, then when our child was born, there was a sense of guilt. There was this thing of our firstborn son was our firstborn son, but he wasn't our first child.
Yeah, there's an echo there.
And
yeah.
it was there, and it needed. And so all these years, I've lived with that. I've lived with that echo. And so it was very cathartic for me to write Heart Twinkle, which was just for me to be able to say, that it's okay. It's okay that baby is in heaven, and that baby sees this baby and is very, happy about this child and how that heart, and that was good for me. It was good for me as a mom. It was good for, my son when he read it. It's been good for all the parents. It's the number one book out of all my books. It's the one that's been the most popular.
Yeah.
Because it resonates with people to understand that is such a real experience.
Yep.
It's such a real experience for us to get there and to understand that it is okay to grieve and love at the same time.
Yep.
That's an okay experience. And so I think when we write and we tell those stories, we're telling people that this happened to me, and it's okay if it happens to you. You're going to survive it. You're going to get through this ocean of waves. You're going to get through this experience. You're going to survive it.
Yeah.
And I think that's the real thing, is that there's just been a history of us being quiet about those things, not talking about those things.
Definitely. I mean, I think from a clinical perspective, I think it's all the family trauma and the lack of positive voices in our own lives that lead to insecurity, that if we're confident that that's cocky, if we speak highly of who God says we are, but if we don't know who God says we are, then all we are is speaking about who we think we are, right? That does lead to arrogance and pride and ego. And so, but if we're coming from a perspective of, I'm speaking about who God is and who he says I am and who he says you are, then that changes everything. And I think that's the difference in the testimony. When you're sharing a book or something, you're doing it to encourage other people to say you too.
Right.
And that's much different than an autobiography about look at me.
Yeah.
Right. And
sure.
and Scripture says that to boast in our weaknesses.
Right.
Right. To say like, I struggle with this, I struggle with that. Like, I'm not perfect. Here's the story. It's a mess because it's not about me.
Right.
It's about what God can do with me.
And how he can take a scripture that you read and that I read, and he can take that and it can be expounded so much differently. And I can even read it one time and get one experience from it and come back to it and another and have a completely different experience or take on it. That happens to me all the time.
Definitely.
And I read this and I was like, oh, well, I took that away. And then I read it again. I'm like, oh, I took that away. They're different perspectives. And I love that God has that depth in his word. And it's so real when we walk through it, when we walk through those places. And realistically, even people who are not in love with the Lord, they don't have that relationship with God, or they don't have that experience, or maybe they believe God has let them down, or that's not. There's some reality in life that just happens. I mean, your creator created this world, whether you acknowledge him or not, it's still a fact.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, you can go through your whole life and not acknowledge him, but it's still the reality. And so the whole thing, when you go and you address that one piece at a time and you talk about it in real life experience, people can relate to that. They can relate to what my real life experience. The scripture can almost become a spine to support, what you're seeing and experiencing.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's important.
And I think, just like scripture's literature, God's not done speaking. And so although things aren't perfect and infallible in the way that I think scripture is, there's still a lot to be gained out of lots of good books. I'm reading one right now that's, rocking my socks. And, you read stuff and you're like, how did I never think of scripture that way? I'm 40 years old. I've been doing this for, however long. And then, that's the thing about age, though, is that the older you get, the more stupid you realize you are. 30, I was like, oh, I'm 30. I'm finally mature. I got this. And 40, I'm like, I'm an idiot. I can't wait till 50. And I look back at my 40-year-old self and go, you didn't have that. And I think that's sanctification, too. It's, maturity is realizing, like, you don't have it all together. There's so much to learn. And you're not the same person every 6 months. If you're doing work and in community and really growing, and for me in therapy and meeting with spiritual guide and working on stuff, every 6 months I feel like a totally different human being. And so when you read Matthew when you're 25 and when you read Matthew when you're 35, or when you have 2 kids or 1 kid or a season of loss or whatever, you're going to hear a different thing.
And I think that's like one of the really great things about writing, and even going back and reading your own book. I was, Oceans of God's Love is now an Audible. And so in the mornings, like, I play that Audible and I'm like, wow, that's like really good. And then it's not my voice, so I don't hear myself talking, but it was like, wow, that's really insightful, but it's been years, it's that whole process of taking it back and like, wow, that's a neat perspective. And I think that's what it happens is when we write, we can go back and we can read, and we can see that the language has grown and we have grown and we have changed, but we can always take things away. There's nuggets that we are taking away. And that's how scripture is laid out, how we take that and, we expound on that, but also in our experiences, in our interpersonal experiences, we take those things, we grow from good and bad. The good things that happen, the bad things that happen, all of those are valuable to others and what you take away.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I hope that, people listening, the main message of, this moment is to value what you have to say and put it out there. And whether it's in a journal for yourself or whether it's, eventually published, I think there's so much value in telling people's stories and people telling their stories to get perspective, to understand, to externalize the emotional part of it and capacity, but then, to give to other people and these universal truths are so
and you can write in professional capacities. I write for magazines just like you do. We write for, different sources, and I write for magazines in a professional capacity, and that's a different side of who I am. That's putting experience out, that's sharing that, just like when you go and talking to parents and you're sharing your experiences, or to teachers or to communities, faith communities, that type of thing. When we're out there sharing those things, we are providing value, but we're also taking away great value. And when we're doing that, when it's that ebb and that flow of coming back into us, that is something that we are learning from. That's the experience that we're constantly learning from. And I think that growth is valuable to see for yourself, to go back and re-examine your own self. So I know my father is a pastor. I don't know if you know that, but my father is a pastor, and so years and years of ministry. And we were talking the other day about surgery. He just had back surgery. I've had 4 in the last 2 years. So I'm well aware of back surgeries. And he's like complaining about how it hurts. And I was like, yeah, I actually understand. I really do understand, like, empathetically, because I have actually had the exact same surgery that you've had. I understand it at a different level. And that experience, just like miscarriage, just like, loss, just like any of those things, people empathetically understanding at a different level or a different depth is powerful. And that's what, when you put your words down and you share those words, and there's power in that, being able to share those experiences with other people and helping them to understand, not only in a professional capacity, but in a personal capacity, just being able to say, I've been where you are. I understand where you're coming from. you can do this. You can walk through this.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's, I think, the power of putting it in a book form,
Absolutely.
and do that.
Which one's your newest one? Is that the
Probably. Well, there's a couple.
published.
Yeah, I was going to say, the ones that you have. The newest one that's out is called The Brain House, which is about Alzheimer's, and it's not actually there in your hands yet. Neurodiversity and Heart Twinkle. Those are both. I want to say shorter versions. They're just exploring an aspect. So Neurodiverse actually talks about neurodiversity and the new terminologies.
Yeah.
Because a
Let's
lot
talk
of
about
times
that a
that's
bit.
confusing for people, and understanding what neurodiverse means. It's a new concept for people to understand that we can embrace our brain in whatever perspective that we are in and be okay. Being different is okay. And there's been for a very, very long time, there has been such a negative connotation to thinking differently and to learning differently.
Mm-hmm.
And being a neurodiverse individual, and we have so many now and on the grow because of so much happening in our world that impacts our diversity.
So let's break that down for a second for people, because I know it's a word that it's going around, but what is it? What does it encompass, and then why the shift?
I think there's been a perspective of, if you learned differently, you were bad or not as good as other people. There's been a lot of what we call mind shaming. Whenever you're not able to do what everyone else is to do or think in the exact way that they think, then there's been a negative connotation to that from years and years and years.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that that's been, a couple of things that pop in my brain? One, I think the fact is that neurodiverse people are increasing. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
Okay.
100%.
So one, I think the problem historically has been that neurodiverse people were in the minority, and they were,
For sure.
more difficult to deal with. People didn't know what to do. And so with that, they're just like racism or sexism, there tends to be a power differential that then causes kind of ostracization and all that stuff. Historically, who were those people? What do you think about that? Like
The neurodiverse people?
Yeah, like before we had the word, who would be the people like ADHD?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, people who learned differently
Right.
or approached life differently. So when you look at the learning process, typically there was learners who just learned easily. They were in a classroom, and learning just came easily for them. And then there were those who struggled, and those who struggled with learning got labels.
Right.
Okay. And so all of the different labels that were around, for a while, that was, let me just slap this label on and put you in a corner or put you in a place.
Can you give some of those labels?
ADHD, dyslexia, dysgraphia, ODD. They're infinite. There's so many. Historically, probably slow learner was probably the most prevalent. I remember when I was in school, that was kind of the label. You were either mentally retarded, which I know that's not the term we use now, but that was, mental retardation was the term. Right. You were put into a classroom by yourself. You were ostracized,
put on the short bus.
Put on the short bus. Yes, all of those things. And there's connotations to those. There's, feelings about those and shaming that goes on with that, to such an extent that populations in our world would even do away or hide those people, not even sending them to school, not letting it be acknowledged. Historically, even looking at, royalty, because of inbreeding and different things that happened in royalty, they had a lot of people but they hid it.
Yeah.
It was a very bad thing. And so historically, it has been, neurodiversity has not been embraced. And so the term has come around more recently that we talk about neurodiversity, but it simply means diverse, meaning different, and neuro having to do with the brain. So it's diversity of the brain, diversity of the learning process. And that in particular has been a lot with the autism community being on a large grow.
Yeah.
Has been a lot of people that learn differently in the Asperger's world, in the world of social machinations being different.
Yep.
That has been a group that has felt sidelined.
Yeah, sensory kids, in that category too,
Very much so.
as a separate category. So what's the difference in your experience with autism, Asperger's? What shift happened, and how does that continue to get better?
So to know the truth of that, there's what we call executive function.
Right.
And executive function is I'm going to say a long line. It can start from very slight weakness in executive function is I can't multitask really well, or something like that, all the way to I cannot socially live in this world at all. So there's a very vast field of executive functions that impact people. And in that executive function is your autism and your Asperger's and your ADHD and your executive function disorder and your processing speed and your sensory processing and your auditory processing, and all of those different things all fall on that line of executive function. So executive function, I like to say, is like our CEO of our brain.
Yeah.
It's just basically when the cat's away, the mice are going to play.
Right.
And so we have that a lot. We get tired. We have too much technology. There's so many impacts to that. It's crazy.
Especially our society today.
Absolutely. Not enough sleep, improper diet. So many things that we can say.
Well, Dr. Amy Moore came on and we talked about and we talked about her 5 pillars of that kind of stuff. And it was really, really, so many people have loved it and helpful because it's right. It's like before giving a label, let's see if we're doing these 5 things we actually can control.
That's right. Yeah. And so addressing all of those different pieces. And it's amazing how knowledge and the pieces that we put together are not easily attainable for a lot of people. They sit hard for us to grasp or hard for us to understand, or I don't want to be different. And that's really what I was addressing in neurodiverse is I don't want to be different. People say it's okay to be different, but I don't want to be different. I want to be just like everybody else.
Yeah.
And what is that really? Who is everybody else? There is grief there.
Yeah.
There's a lot of hardship there in that. Don't say, I'm not cool. I am cool. What is that?
Which is interesting because the neurodiverse friends of mine, I tend to like more than I like the regular people. That's the thing about it's a heart posture of our culture, and to kind of wrap the gospel back into that. It's like, God is a creator God. He creates. Satan, sin, evil, whatever narrative you want to have for it, he's not a creator.
Right.
Right. And I heard it say, it said Satan is a creature, not a creator. He cannot make the clay. He can only use the clay that God has created. And it's like, he just twists stuff up. Brokenness twists things up. And people in the diverse journey of life, it's difficult. However, those of us who either aren't on that spectrum or journey, we can help that tremendously if our hearts are more open to going, hey, there's not a certain necessarily way. Right. And what I was going to say is that, especially in 2023 and probably in 2033 and 53, people that aren't neurodiverse are, in my opinion, going to be the minority.
Right.
And if we're not already close there now,
right.
Between sensory issues and food allergies and autism and Asperger's, and it's like, I don't know a kid, there aren't many kids that don't struggle with those things. I just don't think we even pay attention to some of those things because, social economic status can help tremendously kind of push those kids forward, even though maybe they have some struggles that they won't learn about until later. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's pretty much what I was addressing is, as in neurodiverse, which I end with is I'm different and so are you.
Yeah.
We are very different. There's no two people that are exactly alike. That's how God created us. There is no such thing as normal. We are all abnormal. We are not any of us going to fit a mold. There's not that. But for so many years, we tried to shove people into those molds.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we are now, is that we're now starting to accept that I can learn differently. I can be different, and I can be okay with that.
Yep.
And I think that's hard. And as a brain trainer, I see this every day from all walks of life. I see people who had their own strengths and felt like they were the best of top of their peers, and now because dementia, age, whatever, that's begun to impact them, and they don't feel like the same person that they once were. And that starts a grief process. It starts a really hard process for them, to process this new reality of what's happened. Or maybe you went through something, grief or trauma or, hospitalization, injury, some type of thing that changed the way that your brain processes information, and now has turned you from a quote unquote feeling like you're normal to now a neurodiverse individual. And that's very difficult for you. And I think that's where we get into a lot of these, debates and sides where, we're going to get into all these gender conversations and all these, I'm going to swap my gender, I'm going to swap my brain, I'm going to swap my this, I'm going to swap my that. I think a lot of that comes from not being able to embrace the unique person that you are. Mm-hmm.
And the diversity within yourself.
Right.
Because you're not just a body, you're somebody.
Correct.
You're a unique individual image bearer of God, and that's not a perfect thing. People say, well, God doesn't make mistakes. And it's like, well, no, he doesn't make mistakes, but biology is not perfect and there's brokenness. So we're all born with things that God didn't intend, but that he can use for his glory and your good.
Sure. And
your worth and value is not based on whether you do or don't have autism, or whether you do or don't have ADHD, or whether you do or don't have a penis or a vagina. Your identity is not in those things.
Right.
And I think part of our American culture, especially, and just maybe Western culture, is really pushed that our worth and value is in those things, in our education, which is the problem, right? It's like, well, you have the smart kids who can do this and these kids who don't. And so their worth and value to society as a whole is less. Right. Because you're not going to be able to perform. You're not going to be a good worker. You're not going to be contributing. And so therefore we need to put you over here, and, you can survive and be here, but you're not going to be the successful star, quote unquote. And it's like that toxic, in my opinion, Christian philosophy and thinking is what continues to stir this isolation for people. When in reality, some of my favorite people are neurodiverse and bring so much value to relationships and conversations and ways of thinking. I mean, most of the successful people in history, right, who have done some of the most amazing, profound things were neurodiverse.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that's what's insane.
It's the ability to think outside yourself. Mm-hmm. I mean, and I think that's who God created us to be, is to get outside of our shell. And that's what writing is for me. Mm-hmm. Writing is for me is getting outside of the perspective. My father told me when I was a young lady, he said, you are the mother of the woman that you're going to become. It's a really deep thought. You have to go on that one for a little while. But when you think about that, is right now what you're doing to yourself is you are growing the person who you will be in the future. Mm-hmm. So if you think about that and you start feeding that person who you're going to be in the future in depth and learning from that person so that you can grow into that person, that's powerful. And whoever you become is okay, because that's who God created you to be. Mm-hmm. And I think that is the powerful piece that we have to take away. And that's what writing, that's where that value is. That's where you're putting those thought processes out there for. That's what neurodivergence is all about, is that we all think differently, and you can embrace the way that you learn. You can embrace the way that you think. And if the way that you think isn't as fast as everybody else and you want to be faster, go to brain training. Brain training makes you faster. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's an okay thing. You can embrace that. If I want to be more fit, I go to the gym, right? I mean, it's just you embrace what you want to where you want to go in the future.
That's good.
And you can do that without seeing it as a limitation.
Yeah, or without putting your identity into it, right?
Exactly.
It's both ways, because it's the same. I mean, it's the problem with everything. It's, I want to get in shape, and now I have to be this certain image, or it's not enough.
Right.
And we achieve it, and we know what that does, right? Even smart, even intellect, right? I'm going to write this book. Like, if you're, right, I know you, so I know you're writing these books, right? Not to get affirmation and not to, achieve something to go, well, I have this many books or that many books. It's like, no, I'm doing this because it's good for me. And if it happens to help other people, great, right? And I know that people need it, and people say they need it, because it doesn't matter. If you get, I was talking to somebody about the TED Talk the other day, and if years ago, if somebody would told me you're going to do a TED Talk, I would have been like, that would be the pinnacle of all things that I would want to do, in speaking. I mean, I remember we lived in this house that had one room with carpet in it, and we had dogs, and so we used to have to go to Brookshire's or whatever and rent one of those vacuums that like cleans it.
Yeah, the rug doctor.
Yes, because it smelled so bad. Whoever previously had it, it was terrible, and we couldn't afford to change the carpet out. So like it felt like every week I was going to do this freaking rug doctor thing on this rug. So I would put my headphones in. We didn't have kids, and I would just listen to TED Talks. This was a decade ago, and then got the call last summer, and then got to prep for it, and there's all this build up, and you go and you do it. And now that was January, we're almost 6 months out from me doing that. And it's like, it didn't change anything.
Right.
It didn't change my happiness. It didn't change who I am. It didn't change my marriage. It didn't change my ability to be a father. For a moment it was great. And for a season it was a lot of work, and by the grace of God, I knew that going into it. And so I wasn't disappointed.
Right.
I think when we do it from the right heart posture, when we're walking in the Spirit, when we're doing it for God's glory, then at the end of the day, it's like, it doesn't really matter. And the inverse is true, that if you think so lowly of yourself, I love this book. I read through some of it. Like, if you think so lowly of yourself that you don't want to be who you are because that's not enough,
right?
That's the problem too.
It is.
And that's pride too.
It is.
That's the twisted pride, is I'm not going to receive who God says that I am.
Right.
Because that doesn't line up with who I want to be. And you can grieve that, right? You can grieve it, but to find peace, you're going to have to find some reconciliation within that.
And you have to get past the labels. You have to get past the labels of life. My label is not, I'm just a mother. My hat is not just, I'm a wife, or I'm Donesa. Even, your name, it's more than that. Who you are is who God called you to be and who you are in his image. And that is a growing process. You will never become. And if you can accept that you will never become, you just are, then you can embrace a whole bunch more of yourself.
That's good.
You're just constantly on the road to who God has designed you to be. And so just doing that process and understanding that, like I said before, sometimes you're going to be really in the deep water and choking and drowning and feeling like it's all, over. And the other times you're just going to be walking in the sunset along the beach, know, and that's going to change in life. That's going to change. You're going to have ebbs and flows, and you have to realize that and embrace that and just say, I'm okay with that. I'm okay if I'm here or I'm there. A few years ago, I went in for a minor procedure in 2018 with the doctor, and unfortunately, things didn't go as perspective. And I spent 8 months in and out of the hospital. Not part of my design, not part of what I wanted to do. Results, in your body and in your systems are not. But at the same time, if you define yourself by that one moment and you limit yourself by that one moment or that one time or those things, then you miss out on all of the things that God has for you. Yeah. You miss out on all the development of who you can be. And through those processes, you can become through those processes. You can just keep becoming. Absolutely.
And a lot of bad can be wiped by a little bit of good. Those things are hard. Being in seasons of sickness or depression or mental anguish or, conflict with a parent or a family member or, whatever. Like, they're really tough seasons while they're there. But like everything, right, it's a season. And most of the time you get out of that season and you go, oh my gosh, I thought that was going to be my life forever, and it's not.
Right.
That's one thing that, people struggle with intrusive thoughts and anxiety and fear is you get stuck in the moment. And you're like, I'm never going to think about this differently. This is always going to be how it is. And then you wake up one day and it's not that way, and you start to find hope and movement. And so if you're out there listening to this, I know Donesa and I share the same philosophy on, go to God with it, bring it to him, pray, write, find out who you are, what your identity is, and who he says you are, not what your parents say, not what the world says, not what you say, but that you are loved and you are valued and you are worthy and you have a unique and special purpose on this earth. And you have so much power inside of you to influence the sphere of influence you have.
Right.
Whether that's 10 people or 100 people or 10,000 people or 1 million people, it does not matter. Mm-hmm. Right? What matters is, are you living out who you are at your best self for the glory of God and for the betterment of our world and other people? And if you measure that against somebody else, it's going to steal your joy. It's going to cause you to stay stuck in where you're at. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's a growth process.
Absolutely.
That's it. That's what it's about.
Any closing thoughts or comments? Or that was good. I appreciate you coming on and sharing your books and your vision and just your heart with people, because I think people need the encouragement for sure.
I think just if everyone can do exactly that, just embrace that the person that you are is a person who's becoming. Mm-hmm. And you're always going to be becoming. So just embrace who that is, and you're going to be becoming for the rest of your life.
That's right.
And that's okay. It's a growing process. Whether it's your brain that you're growing through hurt or trauma, or you're going through hard things, or you're going through, and put it out there. Let it be. Let people learn from you. And whether that's something that you just share on a Facebook page, or you share it in a book, or you share it with a friend, or maybe you don't want to put it on paper. Maybe you want to talk, right?
That's right.
Get out there. Don't be scared of being and becoming.
It's good. Now, we don't need to see your food, and we don't need to see hear your diary, your personal diary about what happened at Walmart when you didn't get what you wanted. You can leave that off of Facebook. But if
or market only me, not public.
Yeah, absolutely. Goodness gracious. You're like, you read sometimes, you're like, this is not your personal diary. I think it's your personal diary when it's encouraging and you've, trying to put some light out there.
There is a setting, only me.
That's right. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Thanks, guys, for listening. Donesa Walker, check out her books. We'll list them and put the links. They're all on Amazon, so you can get those and do some good reading. God bless you guys and have a good week.